So 5:32, we'll call
Wait,
the meeting.
we're not there yet, I don't think. Hang on.
Okay.
I have a message that says meeting is now streaming live. Does that mean anything?
Not yet.
Okay.
Okay, now we are live.
Thank you. I'd like to call the meeting of the Amity Regional Board of Education Policy Subcommittee into order. It's 5:32.
Hang on. I gotta shut something down. There we go. Okay, now we're good.
Now we can call the meeting to order. It is
So you're already called to order. We were just getting the delay in the feed. You're all
Thank
set.
you. And then so then our first item on the agenda would be to approve the minutes from our last meeting from November 23rd.
I'll make that motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
Second.
And did we take a roll call?
So, we absolutely can. That's probably easier for Ms. Pero, especially since she's on mute. So, so we have the motion. So, Mr. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. DeMayo,
Yes.
Ms. Eichler,
Yes.
and Mr. Howard.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you. Public comment?
We did not receive any public comment today.
Thank you. And then item 4, policy 3541.44, transportation equipment.
So this policy went to the board for a first read, and then it came back to policy. I think it was just for, and Ms. Pero can correct me, I believe some typos that were in the policy, but the content remains the same, correct?
Except for that highlighted, the second paragraph, they wanted it to be reworded. They asked if it could be reworded, the yellow highlighted one, prior authorization.
If I recall, I was the one that raised the issue. I'm not sure exactly what the intent was here. I got the impression that the district assumes no liability unless the employee has prior authorization, but it seemed like it intended to exempt emergency situations from that. At least that's the impression I got, but it doesn't say anything about that.
I believe maybe it's the order of the sentences.
Right.
So it seems like the first sentence should come second.
The question I'm asking though, if it's an emergency situation, prior authorization may not be necessary, but I mean, if it's an emergency situation, you're not going to be able to get prior authorization.
So is the suggestion to make it shall?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Maybe putting the two sentences together, and I'd looked at something like this: except in the event of medical emergency, the Amity Regional School District assumes no liability unless the employee has prior authorization for such transportation. I don't know how that sounds. Maybe you'd have to take a look at it a little bit better, but I'm trying to get to the point that we need it to be at.
So except in the event of a medical emergency, comma, ARSD assumes no liability unless the employee had prior authorization. Okay. I think that would accomplish it and it works fine. I don't think there would be question about that.
So does that mean that it can go to second read, or does that have to, how does that work? Because we made a change.
Make a motion for that change.
I think it goes on to second read, and then they can still opt to send it back to us if they don't approve it. And we've never really done a third read, but I suppose you can.
So do we have a motion
Motion, to
So Mr. Davis has a motion to accept the policy as amended or edited. All right, Mr. Davis,
yes.
Mr. DeMayo,
Yes.
Ms. Eichler,
Yes.
Mr. Howard.
Yes.
All right.
And item 5, policy 5131.6, alcohol, drugs, and tobacco on page 7 of our packet.
I'm trying to, there we go. Okay. So this one also came back and I couldn't remember why. And Pam and I both scoured all our notes. And Mr. Howard, we actually think you were the one who recommended it would go back, but we could not for the life of us remember why. We thought it had something to do with CBD, but we weren't sure.
Did you say QVD or CBD?
CBD.
I believe somebody brought that up, but it was not myself.
Okay.
I wasn't at that meeting, so I can't help.
Ms. Para, did you watch that board meeting to see what was the issue?
No, I didn't watch it since we spoke. No. I know that they mentioned CBD and it is at the very, very end of the policy, so I wasn't sure exactly what was requested.
There's probably 3 or 4 names that I could think of that would have brought that up, but I'm just thinking out loud. Not mentioning any names, but
And that would have been the December 14th meeting. I'm looking at my notes, but I don't see a note about anything other than what we just said.
So perhaps we should move this to our next policy agenda, and then that would give Ms. Pero time to go back and listen to the meeting and figure out what on earth everybody wanted to have changed about it.
Before you do that, I don't know if this was brought up at the time, and maybe this was an issue that I saw here. The disciplinary action on page 9 of the packet indicates that students who violate or who are participating in CIAC-controlled activities shall be declared ineligible for such activities. And that's in accordance with the CIAC policy and regulation. But it doesn't apply this policy to non-CIAC participants. In other words, we do have some athletes that participate in sports events that are not regulated by the CIAC, which would seem like it's not treating them both the same as far as the disciplinary action that would take place. So would they be, would we need something to be added that would indicate that whether they're CIAC or non-CIAC, they're declared ineligible?
So are you thinking cheerleading? Or what?
is
Uh,
rugby,
Because that's the
is
only thing I can think that's not regulated
We
by the
have ski
CIAC.
racing, we have dance, we have girls ice hockey. None of those sports are CIAC regulated. I cheerleading may also be involved in that.
Thank you.
Maybe that's something we could investigate if we're going to postpone.
Yeah, we absolutely can.
Did Mr. DeMayo have something he was saying?
I thought at one time rugby was a sport that was offered. I don't know if it still is or not, but that was not sanctioned by the CIAC.
All right.
Or the school.
Yeah, I don't think we offer rugby.
School did, but
They
may
call
not-
themselves the Amity rugby team, but they were not a school sport. It was a whole insurance thing and they were
Okay.
not.
All right, fair enough. Thank you.
Yep.
So sure, we can absolutely continue to look at that, Mr. Davis.
Right. And the other comment, should athletics are extracurricular activities, but we don't highlight any other ineligibility for extracurricular activities.
So I think that that would start to fall under the discipline policy.
Right, that's
as
what I
we
was
address
thinking.
it there. But I think part of this, and I believe this is why the CIAC piece is in here, is this revised policy included the performance enhancing substances,
Mhm.
whereas previous policy, that was a totally separate policy.
Right.
So I think CABE merged them together, and then they wanted kind of have that circular referencing back to the PEDs. So I have a feeling that's why it ended up in there. Certainly if a student was suspended or expelled, that would impact any extracurricular activity that they did under the suspension and expulsion policy. So I have a feeling that's where that comes from, but I wouldn't be opposed to adding the non-CIAC sports as part of that section if it was connected to specifically the performance enhancing drug component of this. And I think when we were looking at this, we actually recommended removing the steroid policy because it was encompassed in this one.
Not to get too far in the weeds, but just a clarification or a potential. So let's say if there's a athlete that gets falls in this CIAC policy. Let's say they're at a different school and they get suspended and or expelled, and then that student comes to Amity. They would fall under that, correct?
So
let's say a private.
this is just more an expulsion follows a student. So if they were expelled from a different school district, we would be aware of that. A disciplinary record like a one-day suspension doesn't necessarily follow a student because it's not part of their cumulative file.
I guess what I'm asking is if the CIAC is going to get involved and a student at a Catholic school, for instance, is suspended and or deemed ineligible due to PEDs, I would hope that that would follow that student to the other school. And
the CIAC wouldn't know that. They have no legitimate interest in knowing if that student was using performance enhancing drugs. It falls under their guidelines, but we wouldn't notify them of that, nor would the Catholic school or anybody else.
Right, but I'm just saying, okay, I mean, I guess it's a different topic for a different day, but I could see a loophole where if someone is kicked out of school and or suspended from their sports team in the fall, they could re-enroll at Amity or somewhere else and be eligible, whereas they probably wouldn't be eligible at that school, which could potentially cause problems in my interpretation. And so probably different topic for a different day, but just came to mind.
Yeah, they probably certainly could. At least the way things are currently structured with disciplinary records and transfers and things like that.
Was that a hand, Mr. Davis? Or just stretching?
Well, if you know, if the question I had about the whole issue was CIAC has specific policies for the CIAC athletes. We as a board, I think, would be able to apply those also to the non-CIAC sports, and that would be the change that I would recommend. And other than that, I think we'll let go and save whatever concerns there are for the future. But maybe we still want to wait and find out if there were other issues that were raised at the Board of Ed meeting. So maybe put a hold on this for the next policy committee meeting until we can investigate further what the board's intent was.
Thank you.
So Ms. Pero, do you
Could we have a motion? Could we have a motion on that?
a motion to what?
To delay the policy until the next meeting?
There you
I
go.
don't think we need a motion. I think it would be a motion to send it to
Table it.
second read, right? Would this be be a table?
Motion
Right, aren't we
table.
tabling
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, we're delaying it till the next, or we're delaying it to the next policy meeting, or we're, however you want to word it, but
So it would be a motion to table it for now.
Yes,
Okay.
So moved.
thank you, Mr. Davis.
And then we don't need to second these.
No,
just go
any
to
other
the roll.
discussion?
I don't think a motion to table needs a second, but
No.
No.
All right, Mr. Davis,
yes.
Mr. DeMayo,
Yes.
Ms. Eichler,
Yes.
Mr. Howard.
Yes.
Okay,
And then item 6 is the policies in the 3000 series.
yes, I believe this may be the end of the 3000s, so.
Yay.
All right, so Ms. Loomis, the first, and I'm going to ask Terry to help me with these, but the first one is 3324.1, the policy on contracts. And I believe what the challenge was is that when we were reviewing this, all we have is a regulation. We don't actually have a policy. So what we recommended doing is turning our current regulation into policy 3324, get rid of the point 1 because we just need a blanket one. And then what we did is we used the language and most importantly, the legal references from the CABE review, which are the most updated, but we added the line about the contracts exceeding 35,000 because that was unique to our original regulation. So I hope that all makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. So on the agenda, it did say point 1, but Ms. Perro knows it's not point 1 for,
Yes, but for right now, that's kind of just how that's why it's messy. So,
sure.
so that would be why we would recommend those changes.
Thank you. Will we take the 3000 series together in a motion at the end, or?
Because that's the way that it's listed, we absolutely can.
Okay. Let's try for that.
Right, Ms. Perro, would you agree? Because it's
Sure.
listed that way? Okay.
sure.
All right.
Thank
So the next one, 3543.31. This was a suggested policy from CABE, and we actually would not recommend the board adopt this simply because we are dealing with something that is so flexible all the time. I feel like it's a policy that we would continually be updating. We do maintain these records that they are referring to as part of just our email system and because of when we have requests for information from parents. So as a recommended policy, we did not suggest that the board adopt this. And then policy 3543.311. Again, it was a recommendation as a policy to have, but not one that was required. And I think the other important thing on this one in terms of the destruction of the records is we follow the state guidelines for record retention and destruction. So we don't really need a policy in place because we have requirements that we have to follow according to the state anyway.
Thank you.
And then the last policy, 3560. So it was an existing policy that CABE reviewed for us and said that it was appropriate. But we did add in, I don't know if you have color copies, we added in the blue sections, right, Ms. Loomis? Those
Yes.
were our updates. And so the two things that we changed, was the supplemental appropriations, the 1%. We didn't put in the 1% because we don't know if it's going to be 1 or 2, but just that we can make supplemental appropriations according to statute. And then we refined the bottom paragraph about the emergency situation so that it matches what the expectations are in our bylaws for the AFC and how that operates. So we updated that so the two of them are actually aligned.
May I ask a legal question?
Yes.
In reading this, the middle paragraph, which was only, there's just not a legal change. Something seems wrong to me here where the Amity Finance Committee can make a decision to not permit the board to consider something. It reads, any capital expenditure or of a non-emergency nature, which may be over 10,000, must be approved by the Amity Finance Committee prior to being considered by the board. And I don't know if a subcommittee has that type of legal authority to do that.
Yeah, that is an excellent point because it is the board's control. So
I mean, they may make a recommendation as far as I understand, but they
Right.
can't deprive the board of the opportunity to discuss it or look at it.
And certainly we've had situations where they haven't approved something, but when we brought it to the board did approve it. So,
Right.
Right, so I have the policy.
Yeah, I was going to say, can you find the AFC policy, Terry? You don't.
Yeah, it's 913. It's 9132.6, and I do have it in front of me. So I'm trying to find the emergency. So we have a paragraph that says all of the committees of the board, including the board as the whole, superintendent, director of finance, shall submit in writing any new proposal. They'll submit in writing, in written form to the AFC, any new proposed expenditure which lies outside the board's approved budget or category with supporting information regarding financial implications in order to enable the AFC to make a recommendation to the board regarding such proposed expenditure. Among its functions, the AFC shall make a recommendation to the board regarding any requested budget change or substitute line item transfer. All such requests for budget changes, substitutes, line item transfer shall require approval by the board prior to implementation. Then it goes on to talk about the emergency. The next one is the paragraph about the emergency, but that really is basically saying that, you know, when possible, we call a meeting or we notify the board. But I think it sounds to me, if what I read, that you're right on target there, Mr. Davis, that the AFC is making a recommendation to the board regarding the expenditure.
So if we changed it to, I just was jotting down, if we changed that word approved to presented to and recommended by, then that would align to the AFC policy, which basically says that.
Right.
Okay.
And so if they don't recommend, we're not I just want to make sure that we're not.
Yeah, I know. If they don't recommend it to go to the board, then what do we do? I suppose we just report that it wasn't recommended.
Recommended by
but
the
it's not
AFC.
requiring the approval.
Because it says in order to enable them to make a recommendation, but it doesn't say. Well, it says they'll make a recommendation. It doesn't say it's a favorable recommendation. So
Correct.
they could make a recommendation not to go forward, but they've made their recommendation.
Yes.
Okay.
Must be sent to the board, must be forwarded to the board with a recommendation. Doesn't say whether it's positive or negative.
Okay, presented to and forwarded to the BOE with a, this may get a little wordy, we might have to wordsmith this. By the finance committee prior to being, okay. How about Ms. Pero and I will tweak and wordsmith this, and rather than bring it to, well, I suppose we could still bring it for our first read, and then even if we look at it and don't like it, we can bring it back for a second. Because we'll have to bring it back to policy anyway.
And you had that note up at the top, you know, if still current practice, so you're just answering the question there.
So yeah, I think Cabe was not clear when they did the review if this is what we were still doing.
Yeah. So that brings us to the end of the 3000 series. So now
I think we still, so yes, you're right, give the 3000s. So I think we would need a motion to move the 3000 series policies forward as discussed and presented.
I'll make the motion.
thank you.
And thank you. And with that, just for clarity, we will bring forward the new policy 3324. We will not bring forward the 3543s, and we would bring the revised version of the 3560. Okay. All right. Mr. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. DeMayo,
Yes,
Ms. Eichler,
Yes.
and Mr. Howard.
Yes,
Okay, wonderful.
Ms. Eichler, did Ms. Eichler make the motion on that? Was it Ms.
Yeah.
Eichler that made the motion?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so policy 5118 regarding non-resident attendance. So I actually requested that the board's attorney review our policy completely. And when she did that, not only did she review the policy, but she also gave us regulations and several forms that could be used as part of this policy. The bulk of the policy is actually much more simple than what we currently have, because our current policy allows for all the different situations when a non-resident can and can't attend. And what Attorney Dugas did is build that into the regulation itself. I will say that this policy came on our radar back in September because the way that our current policy reads is that if a family is going to build or purchase a home in our district, they may enroll the student prior to them actually living in our district. And this year we had 2 families who had out-of-district special education placement students enroll their students in September, even though they weren't actually residents until November or December. And that was completely fine according to policy, but given that we can spend close to $100,000 or $200,000 on an out-of-district placement, it didn't seem to be the most reasonable use of the board's funds or the taxpayers' funds to allow what were essentially non-residents to attend. And it was even more frustrating because when you are an out-of-district placement student, you're not even going to our schools, you're just going to your out-of-district placement, except a different town is paying for it. So Mr. Brandt had asked me to look at this because it threw his budget into a mess. And so so that's how this all came about. And so I only mention because the board typically does not approve regulations, but the regulations would now allow somebody to enroll basically a month before they moved into the district. And then they could request an extension for up to 3 months if something happened. But it certainly isn't the carte blanche that we sort of had that kind of caught us by surprise this year. It's a much tighter policy. And the couple other important pieces to it, when a student is not living with their family member, like say they're living with a relative, right now we currently just get an affidavit and then they stay there. This would require that on an annual basis. So it would tighten that up a little bit. It would also give us the flexibility for people who are renting to require them to provide an updated lease agreement on an annual basis. So it does tighten the residency policy a little bit, but it was really the entire kind of like, you basically have from the first day of school until December 31st to say you're going to live in the district and you can move in. And what that did to our special education tuition this year, that made us kind of reconsider and try to align with something that I believe is a little more fiscally responsible to our budget and to our taxpayers.
Thank you. Regarding the regulation that will be behind this, it's referenced on page 26 of the packet. The superintendent shall establish a regulation. So I'm wondering, does that need to be in the policy, that paragraph?
Yes, because the board would direct that a regulation has to be established, that it's not just a, let's make it up as we go along type of thing.
Got
So
it.
you'll find several policies that say that.
Let's say it. Yeah,
Yes.
thank you. Any discussion?
Yeah, quick question. So if someone purchases a house, they're paying taxes on the house, just not currently living there, but are doing everything in their power. Let's say they're renovating the house. Kind of a gray area for me. I mean, I don't want to put money in the best interest of students. So I'm kind of torn on this, to be honest with you.
Well, and
I mean,
remember
I
that-
see it.
Sorry, go ahead.
I can kind of see it both ways, though. I mean, if, you know, again, if you're purchasing a house and you're doing renovations and you're just not able to move in at that time, but you want, you know, some type of fluid structure for your family unit, depending on what that is. I mean, I don't know. It's a interesting topic. So I can kind of see both sides of it. Just saying. So.
Well, and I don't believe the policy actually addresses that piece or that component. Like I said, that kind of lifted out and went to the regulation. We fall back to the statute that we use when we are trying to prove or not prove residency, which is a student is a resident in the town where they actually lay their head. That's where they sleep, is where they are a resident.
Okay.
And that's the state statute. So like when we have somebody who we believe is not a resident, that's what we pursue, because that is legally what the state defines as a resident for the purpose of education.
All right. I mean, I guess the question is, so if we have someone move in, buy a house in the district, let's say in August, they're going to do renovations and they're not currently living there. I mean, it just, you know, they're going to have to go to school somewhere else and then transition in when they, I mean, if it's the policy, it's the policy. I don't know. It is what it is. So,
I mean, we've certainly had people who will claim that they have a second home, a vacation home, or they may own property that they rent, and they use that address to claim that that is their house for their student, but that is not where the student resides. And so again, it goes back to the state's definition of what constitutes.
I get it. I mean, I get it. I'm just, you know, I get it.
I kind of have some concerns in that area too. I know what the state statute says, but we had I don't know if this didn't apply to Amity, but there was a house fire for a family on a particular street in Orange, and family had to move out of the house for about 8 months. And this happened in October. Without those children have to live or have to go to school now in the other community where they were renting an apartment while their house was being repaired.
They would most likely fall under the homeless statute at that point.
Okay.
Yes.
So there are other safeguards that would protect unusual circumstances like
Right.
that. So for example, when the tornado came through Bethany, right, we had a lot of families, I think we still have some families that are still displaced, but they're qualified to attend under the homeless provision.
Very good. Okay.
Makes
Thank you.
sense. Thanks.
So just a quick question about the ABC, if that'll continue on the pagination, because it stopped at B. I just,
Yeah, that'll.
so if that's it for discussion, do we have a motion?
I'll make the motion.
All right. Mr. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. DeMayo,
Yes.
Ms. Eichler,
Yes.
and Mr. Howard.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you. Now to the 4000 series.
Yeah. So we're getting into these finally. And the policy on 4000 is we currently have a 4000s policy in your packet. Our current policy is the one that is on page 27. On page 28 is the CABE policy. And I believe that, I'm trying to find it. It would be my recommendation. I think the CABE policy is a little bit cleaner. It essentially, it takes most of our policy, but then it creates that bulleted list of what we're looking for with respect to personnel. And I think that that is just a little bit more updated and neat, easy to read and follow. So it would be my recommendation to look at adopting the CABE version of policy 4000 as opposed to our existing one.
So moved.
Well, thank you, Mr. Davis. I love it.
Thank you.
So, if everybody's okay, I'll call the roll. Mr. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. DeMayo,
Yes.
Ms. Eichler,
Yeah. Yes.
and Mr. Howard.
Yes,
Excellent. So we will move that CABE version forward. Policy 4000.1 is a optional policy that CABE presented. Given that we just updated our Title IX policy to reflect the new Title IX, this one's actually already out of date. It was in our packet review, but it would be my recommendation that the board not adopt that policy. And additionally, it would be my recommendation that we not adopt policy 4100 because I don't believe that the board wants to be responsible for reading and approving every single job and position description that we have in the district. I think that this gets a little bit too much into the operations, and I also I'm not sure that personnel committee would be thrilled about having to do all of that work. So, and that one was also an optional policy. So it was my recommendation that those two policies actually not go forward. So I think the last time we did this, when we didn't move them forward, we made note that we reviewed them and then we opted not to send them to the board just so that it was clean in the packet. So.
Right.
I just have a question about that one though, 4100.
Yes.
Why would CABE suggest this? Because it seems like it really is operational. Is there any rationale for that?
I think that it probably, my guess is it probably the idea that a certified staff position with respect to its place within the budget, like we don't add new teachers without approval by the board because it's part of the budgeting process. I don't think it's necessarily it's just oddly placed in here where it gets connected with the position descriptions. But I think that's kind of where more the intent is not so much that it's the actual creation of a new position.
That makes sense.
And we didn't take all the 4,000s together, so we'll do, like you said, we'll just make a note and go on to the last one.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the last one is, so I've explained this before, right? Every couple months I get a update from CABE of things we have to look at. So I try to keep up with those even as we're going through revising these. And so this one just happened to come through. And I know that we had looked at something similar to this when we were doing the 3,000s. When I looked into this a little bit further, it's actually a mandated policy that we have to have according to federal mandates. I can't remember exactly which one it was, but there were, I'm assuming it's Title 49. And if you read it, I think we initially had rejected this in the 3,000s because the bus drivers were not our employees. This kind of clarifies it because it says that the Board of Education expects its school transportation carrier to complete the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. So what it is essentially doing is it's setting it up that we expect our transportation providers to be checking on the updates on CDLs as well as those clearinghouse charges that might be located in there for our bus drivers. So there were two policies that were presented in this CABE packet. Ms. Loomis and I reviewed both of them, and we opted for the more succinct policy and thought that it addressed our needs. And this is not a policy that we currently have, even though we are mandated to have one.
Is the term that the abbreviation CDL represents, is that spelled out?
I don't think it is, Mr. Howard. I don't know if CABE felt that that was necessary or if it's such common knowledge that they chose not to do that.
Okay.
And I assume that the bus companies are already doing this and there's just not a policy for it.
Yes, when we renegotiated it was already in our contracts, but when we renegotiated our contract, we basically have a paragraph that, we have several paragraphs about how they will meet state requirements, but there's one specific to drug and alcohol testing and requirements according to state and federal guidelines. So that is part of our existing contract.
Mm-hmm.
So this being federal, it's one of the two, federal or state, so. Do we have a motion? Mr. Davis?
So we will assume it's a motion to move the 4,000s forward as presented, meaning that the CABE 4,000 and the condensed 4212.42 would go to the board, and the other two, 4,000 and 4,100, would not go forward to the board.
Right.
Okay.
That's what I was thinking.
You're perfect. All right, Mr. Davis.
Yes.
Mr. DeMayo.
Yes.
Ms. Eichler
Yes.
and Mr. Howard.
Yes.
All right. So we will continue to look at 4,000s policies then. But what Ms. Caro and I decided that we would do is, rather than provide everybody the big thick packet, because they are somewhat out of date, we will just keep track of them as we go along in our meetings, and we'll provide them as part of the packet that you get, because we do check CABE to see if they've changed anything since they reviewed our policies to make sure we have something that's the most up to date.
No canary sheets to hold on to.
Exactly.
Very good. So do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you.
Show of hands, that's all we need. And I'll put a shameless plug to come watch me before Orange Finance tonight.
Absolutely.
Have fun with that.
Ms. Barrow and
Thank
Dr.
you.
Myers.
Have a good evening,
Good
everyone.
evening, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good evening.
Jen?